Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. How are y'all? Long time no see. Feels like we've been away a while. Maybe, maybe it's that all these events are happening and it's just overwhelming. I'm almost scared to turn the TV on. What now? Um, After class, my husband and I'll go vote. That's our ritual we do with all elections. We have to go together and then afterwards we're like, well, what did you think? Da, da, da. It's kind of a our family sort of day out, and I I could use a breather just from the following the war news. That is just overwhelming and really awful, and it's just not going to end well for anybody. And I'm curious about it, but it's kind of like watching uh, a horror movie that you don't want to watch. You keep looking at it, and you say, "Oh, I got to turn it off again." And then you look at it some more. It's awful, and I'm really worried about people. And frankly, to be upfront about this, I'm really worried about somebody who threatens nuclear war twice, once right off the bat. Usually you wait around a while before you start threatening people with nuclear weapons. But this guy, he just jumps right in and says, you can't bother me about any of this. Don't interfere. I've got nuclear weapons. God, it's like a hostage situation, literally. So, we have an election today, and it's a state election. It's primary election day. And y'all know about primaries, right? We're starting a chapter on political participation, and there is an awful lot of material to get through. And hopefully we can do that without it being too jarring. And we can certainly tie it to current events. And then tonight, in the middle of election coverage, you've got President Biden's State of the Union address. And so we've got that. Do I need two TVs? Can I flip back and forth? I think it'll take professional remote control handling to get me through uh, this. And I just had way too much ice cream already this week. Ice cream's my thing, y'all. So it makes Putin easier to handle. A big old thing of ice cream. Anyway, I've told off on myself, and so the point of all of this is this: we have a primary election. What does that mean? It means that voters are asked to pare down, choose the candidate that they support in an effort to weed it out to go into the general election. So some of these races, y'all, I think I noticed today that 12 people were running for land commissioner. And I thought, gosh, it's an awful lot of people to know that we have a land commissioner. Um, that's a hot race. And I think that there is a bunch of people running for agriculture commissioner. But at any rate, we have to weed down, weed out who we might like this person, but we know that they can't get elected, so we're not going to vote for them. We're going to vote for the person that can persevere against the opponents. And so some folks get confused about primaries. In Texas, we have a combination of open and closed primaries. And that's confusing to people who've lived in other states that don't do it like this. It's interesting to me in Louisiana on primary day, they have Democrats and Republicans and independents all on the same ballot. Talk about fun. And so that's kind of a different way to manage elections, but we don't do it that way here. What we do, you get your voter registration card. I should have brought mine up here. I think I left it on the refrigerator. I usually just stick them on the refrigerator if we get them a couple of weeks in advance so that we can find them to go show them to vote. You go in and you can vote in the Republican Party primary or the Democratic Party primary, but you can't vote in both. of them. All right. We do not register in Texas as Democrats or Republicans. So when somebody mouths off and says, I'm a registered Republican, well, not in Texas, you're not. Okay. Because we have an open system, they can vote in the Democratic Party primary if they want to. And so a lot of people do that. They go and vote in the opposition's primary and they vote for the weakest candidate, hoping that that weakest candidate gets the nomination, and then their big strong candidate can whoop that not so gifted other party candidate. Okay, that's why it's that way. And y'all got to remember, once upon a time, 40 years ago or 30 years ago, in that ballpark, we had every state executive official was a Democrat, and they all went to Baylor, where I went to school. But that's incidental. The point is, now our executive branch is all Republican. We have swung the other way. And so these party primaries are intense, very intense. What I mean by that is you've got Governor Abbott running in the Republican primary for governor. That's what he is. He's a Republican governor. But he has to face opponents in his own party. And the folks running against him ran more conservatively than Abbott. So they're going to get some really conservative votes. That's your Allen West, he's to the right of Abbott, and he's seeking the party nomination. And if you didn't like Abbott, you didn't think Abbott was conservative enough, you've got Allen West that you can vote for, former congressman, former Republican Party chairman, statewide chairman here in Texas. So everybody has an opponent. It's not a cakewalk. It's not free. And they have to face people in their own party. And what happens if there's a tie? I think there are like 5 people running for governor, maybe 3, 4 people. Maybe I missed somebody. Anyway, let's say for the sake of argument that there are 5 people running for governor of Texas in the Republican Party. Let's say that the 2 top vote getters don't have enough of a margin between them. It's whoever gets 50% plus 1 is the party's nominee. Well, what happens when you have like 5 people in a race? Your top 2 are going to have a runoff. They'll have a runoff election. And that's usually 30 days after the primary. They have that runoff. Okay. Can you vote in that runoff if you didn't vote in the original party primary? Yes, you can. Why would I ask you that? Because it's weird. Okay. Yes, you do not have to vote in that primary to get to vote in the runoff. Okay. Do you have anything that has political party identification on it? Did they put that on your driver's license? No. So you go in with your voter registration card and they stamp that card in the middle. Let me see if I can find you one real quick. Let's see. I think did I lose you? Oh, I hate that when that happens. Oh, there you are. Let me show you.
Professor, I have a
Yes,
question. I
please.
don't mean to interrupt. When I went this morning, I attempted to hand the lady, the poll worker, my voter registration card, which we received in the mail 2 days ago.
Right, I got that.
And
Yeah.
she didn't even want to look at it. She immediately, when she saw I was handing that to her, asked for my driver's license. Is that strange?
Um,
Is that typical?
It it's kind of odd, isn't it? But they want a driver's license. Now, when I have gone to vote all my life, I've been voting since 1980. I've never had to really show any ID. Nobody's ever really asked. Usually I know the person who's the poll worker, but they will ask you for your driver's license. Let me ask you this. Did you feel uncomfortable when she did that? I mean, it's kind of a personal question. I'm sorry.
It made me feel uncomfortable because it made me feel like, um, I don't know, like she was trying to verify that I was able to vote, as if my voter registration card was not sufficient enough. And I've
There you
never had that happen before.
there you go. It was like she was looking for a fight and you didn't want to give her one. So, you just felt squeamish about the whole thing. I would have felt pretty disenchanted myself. But um that that voter ID thing, that driver's license, which has nothing to do with voting. Um, they really like to see that. They really want to know that you're you. And they're really itching for some drama when they go through there, which is absurd because they're going to see hundreds of people that day. Why would you want to be dramatic about it? I am of the philosophy that that voter registration card is your ID to allow you to vote in that, that precinct. Now, oh, and by the way, we used to be real sticklers about that. You had to vote in the precinct rather than anywhere in the county. That's changed. You can vote anywhere. Now, I'm very traditional about my voting. I like to vote close to home, and I see neighbors, and that's nice. But yes, you have to show a form of ID other than that registration card. There have been times that I've gotten to the polls and I just had my driver's license and I didn't have my voter registration card, and they let me vote. But and maybe it's they're not looking for a fight and they know I'm who I am. But I do think that sometimes they can come across as being aggravating or intimidating or disrespectful. It can happen. I will say this about it. In the last few years, you've had more controversy and more uh, are you who you say you are kind of conspiracy theory sort of nonsense. On the other hand, I will say this. I worry about those people because some voters attack those folks. So you don't know what kind of crabby mood they're in. Are they afraid for their safety? Well, I'm not suggesting to you that you would do anything untoward at all, but I do recognize that there's a fine line between everybody has a role to play in this process, and you're just trying to vote. And people take small kids with them because they're trying to instill the democratic process in these little kids. I've seen many little kids go in the voting booth with people. And then there's some people just have a fit about that. They don't like that at all. So I'm sorry that you had a bad experience. Is it typical for them to say, "Where's your driver's license?" Now in Texas, you have to have another form of ID. Now, let me make you feel weird about this. They'll take your gun permit, but not your student ID. Your student ID, even to a state school, ain't good enough. But that gun permit, hot damn, that's good enough. So yeah, I think everybody's got their priorities kind of weird. And I think that somebody shows up and you sign your name and there you are on the roll, then what's the deal? It's a mere formality for somebody to look at your driver's license. Do they really want to press this kind of issue? I guess perhaps they're on the defensive lately, and that's a problem. But yeah, that's a good question. What should happen? What should we expect? We should have a video about that. We should have a YouTube about that. What do you expect at the polling place so that people know what their rights are? By the way, um, a lot of pre-law students and law students go volunteer with the county to be an election watcher. So they have the election code with them and if there is a question there at the voting place, you've got somebody who can at least try to answer your question about what rights you have, or are they behaving accordingly. That's what a poll watcher will do. And I'll say this, it's really sad to me that here we are in the 21st century and you have people who are trying to intimidate and not follow the letter of the law. You're not supposed to show up at the polling place with a gun. That's not good. We still make that a crime, so people don't do that. And you can't uh, have voting places uh, that I have a question about this with a friend of mine, and I'll ask him. I'll email him tonight and see. Um, you're not supposed to be able to take a camera in a voting place. That there's some measure of privacy about that. Now, I think that's interesting because your name is on a voter registration roll. People are going to see you at the polls. So, how much privacy does somebody really have in the voting place? But evidently it's been a law for some time that no photographic devices can be taken in, but nobody's ever asked me about my phone, or did you leave your phone in the car? And I mean, the way that people are standing in line, you kind of want your phone. uh, but I bet lines were pretty short today. I bet there was it pretty quiet there other than that, or were there a lot of people?
Yeah, it was pretty quiet. We
Yeah.
usually do have a wait at my daughter's school, but it's right outside a large neighborhood.
Mhm.
But this morning there weren't very many people there. I would say about maybe 8, 10 people.
Wow. Well, and I tell you why that may be the case. It could have depended upon the time of day. Excuse me. It could have been part of the time of day, but some people like to vote early on their way to work, and some people like to vote afterwards. And we've changed some rather liberalizing laws, and that's a small L for liberal. They had drive-through voting in Harris County, and they had 24-hour voting in Harris County, and they did away with that. The legislature moved heaven and earth and did away with those two things. I mean, anything where you place restrictions on how somebody can vote, what you're essentially doing is um, keeping people of certain groups from voting. And there are always ways to do that. And there's always ways that people can be intimidated uh, at the polls. You're supposed to keep your campaign stuff 50 feet from the door. And you'll notice that signs are in these clumps. And if you paste it off, it would be 50 feet, from the door. But yeah, that's really disappointing. I bet you never forget that you've had that experience, that it's that memorable that somebody was less than gracious at the polling place. And I think you handled it real well. You had your driver's license. That's great. I am of the mind, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm of the mind that that voter registration card that was mailed to you from the county is a form of ID. Why else would you have it? You know? But some people are scared of that and think that there are people doing mass voting out there, using that, trying to get to vote more than once. When you vote, they stamp your card, Democrat or Republican. Now, that is not like it's tattooed on your soul or something. That means that you voted in that primary, and that's all it means. It's to keep you from going back through the line and voting in the other party's primary. It's to keep you from tonight, when the polls close, you have a caucus to attend and try to get to be a delegate from your voting neighborhood to the county convention. We have a convention every 2 years, and you can be a delegate at that county convention, and you might get to be a delegate to the state convention. And then, if we had a president, if we were in a regular presidential year term, then you could be a delegate to that presidential candidate of your choice. So the off-year elections in Texas, those are our statewide, and our state house, our state representatives and our state senators. And by the way, this confuses people. Wait a minute, I've got a state senator and a U.S. senator. Yeah, you do. And knowing that and knowing who those people are, that's kind of tricky for some folks, especially the first time voter. And the ballot can be long and confusing. And that's difficult. But what you're doing at this primary election is narrowing the field down for who is going to be elected in November. You can vote however you wish in the general election. They don't check, oh, you're only, they don't separate it out into Democratic and Republican in November. Everybody just goes in the same polling place and standing in the same line for all of that. And it's weird because this year we don't have a presidential election. People get really excited about these presidential elections. Actually, you probably have more contact with state officials that you don't know about than you do the president. Very few of us will ever have any interaction with our president. But look at how intense the discussion of who you're going to vote for president is. When we ought to pay as much attention as who's going to be our district attorney in our county, who's going to be the county judge, who's going to be our state representative. Because most laws that touch you are done on the state level. It's the local official who sort of knows more about how you live and knows what's important to you. Presidents are not necessarily aware of that. And sometimes in Texas, I know of people in Texas who have never voted for a presidential candidate that actually got to be president. They're always the opposition party. They never vote. They never get that satisfaction of electing their candidate, but they're very committed to voting, very committed. So this doesn't get as much attention. I might have surprised you by telling you that there is an election tonight. I think all of this has been rather low key, considering what's going on in other states, where you're having, okay, tonight at 7 o'clock, the polls will close. And those people who check those ballots and check those driver's license, those people take those ballots and take them to the courthouse. Now, y'all voted electronically. When I first started voting, voted in those flip machines, okay, where you flipped a lever, and then when you pulled the curtain open, it punched your card, if you will, and that's how we voted. I have a very good friend who went to high school with my mom and dad, and his job for, I don't know, for a long time was servicing those election machines. So I went and visited him and I said, I want the tour. I want to see what you do. And so he showed me, and he said, and this is how you fix an election. And he showed me how to do it inappropriately. And so that was good. And you can mark everybody you want to mark, but no matter who you mark, the guy who services that machine is the one who can fix that election, because you can vote that candidate all day long, but he programmed those machines to register the vote for the other guy. That can happen. That can happen. And electronically, folks, it can happen too. I mean, anybody who's ever worked around Scantron graders, y'all have all taken a test on the Scantron, right? Where you color in the little A, B, C, or D, E. If you don't set the counting mechanism properly for that, then those votes could be, programmed for somebody else. I want y'all to watch this movie, Unprecedented. It's about the 2000 presidential election and problems with voting in it. And what happened there was the difference between Al Gore and George W. Bush being president. And it illustrates the point that if you want to fix an election, all you need to do is make the ballot incomprehensible, and you too can fix an election. The ballot in Florida, the key state where the president's brother was governor, the ballot in that state was very difficult to understand, and people marked it wrong. So let me see if I can find you a ballot for, let's see, Florida. It helps if I could spell it right. Florida ballot 2000. This was just 20 short years ago. And here's the ballot. And why you can see, and I'm going to share this. Let's see wait a minute. Okay, let me see if I can share this with y'all. Share my screen. Let's see. There's a kitten in here. Oh, wait a minute. This is going to mess us up. No, I can't do it. But that Florida election, that video, Unprecedented, it will show you what these ballots were like. What happened on the ballot is it looked like it. I want you to imagine a book opening like this, and the hole you punched for the candidate ran the spine of that book. And so they see Al Gore's name is second on the ballot. First on the ballot is George W. because his brother finished first and is governor. So the Republicans get to be at the top of the ballot. The Democrats are supposed to be right behind them. What happened was people punched that second hole and thought that they voted for Al Gore, and then they realized their error. No, they voted for Pat Buchanan. They then punched that hole for Gore. That's an overvote, and that gets that ballot thrown out because it says the election judge must be able to ascertain the intention of the voter. That's how the statute reads. And can you tell who did they mean to vote for? All right. So depending upon how you protect the design of your ballots, how you conduct something as simple as a question about, is this person on the voter roll or not on the voter roll? What you're supposed to do if a person shows up is and they're not on that list, you are supposed to allow them to vote anyway, and their ballot is done as a provisional ballot, and it has to be counted by hand. And so there are all these rules, and it's very complex and very frightening here. Somebody says to me, I just moved from Colorado and voting in person is weird to me because y'all all vote at home, don't you? The entire state of Colorado uses mail-in ballots. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I think if they can get my name and credit card number right at Amazon, why can't they do that? I'll tell you why. Because Amazon and that credit card information thing, that's about money, and people aren't going to get that messed up. But if it's about voting, you want the ability to manipulate those votes. You want the ability for that to occur. And I'll say something else here, and y'all might misunderstand what I mean, so I want to explain. I am of the mind that elections are local matters, not federal matters. And I want to disabuse y'all of something. There's no such thing as a federal election. There's not uniformity about the way all presidential ballots look. They're different from county to county. No county treats all the ballots the same. And I'll give you an example. You live in Fort Bend County? Yeah, okay. You probably, let's say we live at opposite ends of Fort Bend County. I'm represented by one congressman, you're represented by another congressman. So our ballots are not going to look the same. They might be processed the same, but you see how complex this is? So I like my ballots local. And people talking about federalizing an election, that makes me a little nervous. I don't want to give up local control of elections because our state constitution and the US Constitution is pretty clear about elections being local. That having been said, if there's not an agreed upon reality, you can get into a lot of mischief about voting. When I was a naive graduate student and studying this more in depth, I can tell y'all from personal experience, I didn't know much about elections until my husband ran for county judge of McLennan County. And I learned very quickly a lot about how people will be interested in a local election when at first glance, it doesn't appear to be controversial at all. And there is an awful lot of mischief out there about local races. And it's only gotten in 40 years of public life, it's only meaner now than ever before. But I will say this, there's all kinds of ways to fix elections and to pay people for voting. That's why we have gotten more intense about identification. When Lyndon Johnson was elected in 1948, dead people rose from the grave in alphabetical order and voted for him. What I mean by that is there was controversy about Johnson's election. And did he personally have a hand in it? I doubt it. But that kind of fog over you, that dogged him all the way into the White House when he became president because of the murder of President Kennedy. There was this sense that Johnson had done something ill-gotten gains to get elected in the first place. And then for him to be an accidental president, there was this cloud of illegitimacy over him. If y'all haven't watched that CNN thing about Johnson, do sometime. It gives you a lot of insight into that period and into what it was like to be there. Voting was an issue for Johnson all along, and so that kind of fooling around, fooling about people's votes, not taking the vote as careful and as sacred as it is. And they explain to you very clearly about how elections can be manipulated and fixed. And we'll talk more about that as we go on with this section of political power. Today's a big day, voting, and congratulations for doing so. I think that's wonderful. It's very important to pay attention to, particularly local races. Um, Here you've got a war and a situation where we may have a ground war in Europe for the first time since 1945. And I know that sounds terrible about the war, and we tend to focus on it, but I want you to understand that the agreements made between everyone in Europe, the Economic Common Market, the EU, and NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it kept the peace. And what's happened now is there's been sort of a shaking in that very durable collective security agreement. I am not psychic. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I will say this. There are very sensitive, smart Americans who are better at this sort of thing than me, but who are questioning Mr. Putin's soundness of mind, which ought to scare you that much more that he's happy to tell you, I've got nuclear weapons, so you don't tell me what to do. That's really scary to be threatened like that with an awful situation that is unimaginable horror about nuclear war. And if he follows Russian battle plans, which suggest to leaders that if things are going poorly for Russia, a tactical battlefield nuclear device would be in order. What? You're kidding. No, it would be in order. And so thinking about the awful has been a real sobering thing this week, and something that is really quite frightening. Is it possible for him to order a nuclear device in Ukraine? You can order it. Whether or not the Russian army would carry it out is a different thing entirely, and they may not be comfortable doing that. There have been reports that Russian infantry has purposefully gotten lost because they don't want to fire on aunts, uncles, cousins. They know somebody whose grandmother lives there. I mean, that's a very tangible reality. And so that's very interesting that they're putting that much thought into it. What we can do is not, we don't have to get involved. The president's already said we're not going to get involved. We have a lot of troops there. We have a lot of NATO troops there, and we are NATO. And so when the president says we're not going to get involved, we're not, but we're going to help with the refugees that are pouring over the borders. I think 500,000 people have fled Ukraine. That's a good guesstimate. And those people are going to be hungry, and they're going to be needing shelter, and the Army is extremely good at providing those things. But American troops are not going to engage with Russian troops. That's not going to happen. Okay? This is not about that. And this is between Russia and Ukraine. I've been to Ukraine. I have spent a lot of time in Odessa, not so much time in Kiev, but I really like Odessa. And so this has been hard to watch. I keep yelling every time, oh, look, there's something on television, and telling my husband about it. But it's been sad and very disappointing. Tonight, We can watch election returns in Texas, or they'll put it down at the crawl at the bottom of the screen. But we have that State of the Union address too. And so there are lots of institutions that we have to think about with regard to the State of the Union address. What is that all about? Every year, the president is required by the Constitution to give a State of the Union address. What does that mean? It's not like it's a balance sheet where he says, and we approved X amount of money for this. It's not like that. It's a speech that is supposed to be, if it goes off well, inspiring. It's a way of the administration saying, I found it this way, and this is what I did about it. And so you will get a sense of accomplishment. The Biden administration has really had a bad year, and they inherited a bad situation. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what Mr. Biden is doing about that very bad situation. And so he can point to more people vaccinated, but there's still 900,000 deaths there. And people continued dying in large numbers after Biden took office. Was that something that the president could address, or was that something that was a failure on the part of the administration? The previous guy had some misdirections about how to manage a pandemic. So we're trying to find our way through really territory that's unfamiliar to an awful lot of people. And so, how the administration communicates its hopes and dreams and ambitions, you will hear tonight in the State of the Union address. It's a big deal. I've already seen congressmen today with new haircuts and new ties and the pretty dresses, and they go all out for this because it's on TV. It used to be kind of just this perfunctory thing. Thomas Jefferson never went over to Congress to give the address. He wrote it out longhand, put it in an envelope, and mailed it to him. And that suffices. The communication in the Constitution is that the president will give a State of the Union address. And that's all it says. What does that mean practically? Well, some administrations really use this as a statement of their legislative agenda. When Biden came into office in January last year, he gave an address, but it wasn't the State of the Union because he wasn't driving the state bus. He wasn't in charge. This time, he gets to give that speech. Next time, he will get to give that speech where it outlines their successes and their aspirations for the future. Biden has a really bad problem that he did not pass his agenda. He could not find enough votes. And in all fairness, Republicans are quite intimidated to help the president. And so they won't, because they don't want the head of the Republican Party, Donald J. Trump, to give them trouble about that, and to call them out or talk bad about them, because they're worried that that's enough votes to keep them from winning re-election. So they don't say anything. Mitt Romney, senator from Utah, former governor of Massachusetts, he said of Joe Biden not succeeding in his legislative agenda, he said, it would have been nice to be asked. And what he was saying is, everybody likes to be asked. Nobody likes to be left out. And what he was saying there is they did not court Republican votes, that there were moderate Republicans that would vote with the president. And why would Mitt Romney vote with Biden? Because he actually voted for impeaching Donald Trump. So he's already on the negative Trump list. What's a little more? It wouldn't matter. He's so comfortable in his seat that he's not afraid of whatever Trump would say about him. And Trump would actually criticize somebody who was more vulnerable than Mitt Romney. Romney's pretty safe where he is. So I found that profoundly interesting that that Biden didn't work Republicans more for support. If he could have found 2 Republicans, it would have made a difference. And then there's one Republican right there, Mitt Romney, saying, I would have voted with the president. And once one of them does it, it's easier for the next one to do it. So that's kind of a missed opportunity, and that's kind of sad. What Biden is going to do is how Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt got the Great Society and the New Deal forward, is they broke it down into manageable chunks. You didn't vote for the whole New Deal at once. It's cafeteria style. I can square this with my constituents, but I can't square that with my constituents. So I'm going to vote for this, and I'm going to take a walk that day on this and not make a big deal out of it. So maybe my voters won't notice. But no, that's not what Biden did. Biden handed this giant birthday cake to these people and said, here you are, have at it. And literally the expression of biting off more than one could chew really comes into play there. Biden messed up. I don't blame anybody but Biden for not reaching out about this. And I'm surprised because Biden spent so much time in the Senate. He should have known that they will not vote for large packages. They would rather cafeteria style do that for smaller packages. And one thing that's important about tonight, Biden's philosophy is always, and I think that this is an important bipartisan philosophy. This is not just about Democrats. This is not partisan. Biden always thinks that you should leave things better than you found it. And what he's going to say to you tonight is, man, did the Supreme Court change or what? Now, he's not going to say it like that, but he's going to remind you that there are 3 justices on that court that Donald Trump got to put there, and you are stuck with them for 40 years. They live a long time, they keep their jobs, and they rule about desperately private things in Americans' lives, right? Biden is going to introduce his Supreme Court nominee, Judge Jackson, and he's going to say, I can't fix the whole court, but I can leave it better than I found it. Ms. Jackson has an impressive resume. She was a public defender. That is an amazing responsibility because you get paid a flat salary, and it's not much because it's a state or county job. And people who cannot afford justice come to you needing you to help them. There's nothing in it for you. They can go to jail and you still get paid. Okay? You're actually in a position to where you don't have to try very hard at all. You still get paid, and you get your experience as a young lawyer. But she took her job really seriously, and for a kid who went, she's a little younger than me, so I can say kid, for a person who went to Harvard and then turns around and is a public defender, didn't go to a big old honking law firm, and didn't make oodles of money. She took a government salary and focused on the job at hand, leaving things better than how she found them. And so you're going to hear that kind of story. You're going to hear from her. She has a relative in federal prison. How many people get that experience of having a loved one go through the criminal justice system? I can assure you that it's a whole world unto itself. But she has that experience to draw on about how prison tears families apart. And if you're looking for justice, you might keep looking for it because it might not be in that federal prison. So you'll get to meet her. And what he's doing by introducing her is he's actually daring the other half of the Senate to reject her. Because once Americans have met somebody, we have this tendency in our makeup to take that person under our wing. So he's going to try to say, y'all need to support her because she's going to do a good job, and I like her. And the Senate has already approved of her 3 times. She's been approved by the Senate. And so what he's saying is, were y'all wrong then? And you're going to be right this time? I mean, you could have voted against her then, but you didn't. So you need to vote for her now so that you're consistent about those things. So that's why, you're going to get to see her tonight. He's got a lot to talk about tonight. He's got a war in Europe. Thank goodness we didn't start it. Okay. We do have a role to play in it. That's our responsibility. That's who we are. That's what we do. And he's going to introduce the Supreme Court nominee. And I bet you he says something about this being primary day in a lot of states, particularly southern states. And so he's a busy person, on this path. Understanding the political process and how that evolves in what we're going to be talking about. You also have to talk about media. So tonight, when you're watching this State of the Union address, I'm curious how it's going to play on television. And you might want to make some notes about when the moment is good on TV, what made it good. There's a lot of applause lines, y'all, and the Democrats are going to applaud and the Republicans are going to sit on their hands. And then there'll be times when the Republicans applaud and the Democrats don't like that. And it's gotten kind of a bit much. Ever since C-SPAN started covering British Parliament, our people look like they just can't be outdone. And so there's a lot of yelling and applauding at weird things. But watch that. And I want you to watch for this too. You have your entire government under one roof. And there's all the House, all the Senate, the Supreme Court, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Everybody goes to this. I used to think that this was an exaggeration, but I don't anymore. That means if somebody did something terrible, you could end. Yeah, I know. You see, you caught on to what I was going to say before I ever even said it, because I made you worry about it right then too. If somebody wanted to do the awful, here's their chance, because the whole building is the whole government is there. So what do we do about that? I used to think this was kind of dramatic, but I don't anymore. We let the cabinet all draw straws, and the person who gets the short straw, who's qualified to be president, gets on an airplane and flies around all over the country, or they put them someplace and guard them, so that if somebody wanted to destroy the American government, we would still have a president. We would still have a leader. And that's the thinking there. And so it's a person who's qualified to be president, which means what? They were born here. They've been a resident for 14 years. They're at least 35 years old. And anything else? No, that's pretty vague. It's pretty broad. That's the case. Somebody said, found something similar to what you were saying. Oh, in the Guardian, bad ballot design. Let me see if I can get this for you. Yeah, how? Let me see if I can share this. Let's see. Reading in progress, and I want to share this. So let's see if I can. Let's see if it'll work for us this time. Well, will it? Will it? No, it won't let us do it. But at any rate, the point is, yes, bad ballot design. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to highlight that, and I'll send it to y'all in an email, because it really is a good little website. to use. Yeah, there was a movie. There's been a lot of movies about presidential uh, uh, presidential ability to, somebody to step in when there's been an awful mistake or a mistreatment, or that kind of thing. Yeah, I like presidential movies. I like movies about politics, and it's always checking up on them. Did they get that right? Did they express that rule correctly, or is that not part of history? It's kind of fun to watch. So what we're going to do in this next section, it's hard to talk about these things in isolation. What you need to do is read and fill out your worksheet so that you can use that on your exam to help you out. But these things kind of blend together and kind of mix together. So we will talk about things kind of in the order that the textbook goes by. And so we'll talk more formally about elections and voting. And I want to ask y'all something. Do you think that it's representative of voting? In other words, is this true? Do young people participate at the same rate that older people do? Do young people vote as much as older people? And if not, I'm not going to scold you. If not, yeah, that's the name of that whole TV series with Kiefer Sutherland, that designated, yeah, Kiefer. I remember when his dad was young, so it's kind of fun to watch. I like his dad too. Why don't young people vote? They don't vote, by and large. It's a pretty hard and fast rule that young people are your least committed group of voters. They're busy being young. They're busy graduating from high school and going to college. I remember what that summer was like when I graduated from high school. I was too young to vote in the primary. In primaries used to be in May, and my birthday's in May. And I was too young to vote in the primary, but I could vote in the general. And I drove home from college because my voter registration was in Dallas County. I did not register in Denton. And so I had to vote for president. It was the first time I would get to vote for the president. So I was pretty excited about that. And we drove home to do it. It was a friend of mine's first time too. So, you had to go to a specific, the polling place in your neighborhood to vote. And I voted in a fire station the first time. I voted in 1992 when I moved to Houston. I voted in a Walmart. I thought that was fascinating that a commercial business place was used for voting purposes. And I think I stood in line about an hour to vote then. But you're going to see a lot of ballots thrown out in Harris County because they did not conform to the very obscure, difficult forms that the Texas legislature prescribed. And those forms might be unconstitutional. I think there's a case pending about that, but we may not find out about the constitutionality of that until later. Young people are very busy being young, and so they don't vote. So they miss out on being a constituency that politicians consider. If more young people voted, they'd be a little scared of you, and they'd have to pay attention to you and pay attention to your wants and needs. Older people never miss a chance to vote because they have learned to not vote means that you might miss out on something that you're entitled to. Older people worry about Social Security. Of course they do. That's their retirement. And so they want to vote. Somebody said, I was under the impression that younger people were becoming more politically involved. that may be true, and it may be true that they're more involved as an interest group, like they find an interest group that relates to them, so they work on issues that are near and dear to that interest group's heart. Why did young people vote heavily the first time young people could vote? The voting age used to be 21, it dropped to 18. It was in the midst of the Vietnam War. And so the idea was you're going to vote against whoever is committed to the war. After that season of voting, you had fewer voters in the young bracket. Do you believe that people are getting younger in their participation? I think that that has some caveats. I'm not sure that it's always about voting, but do they get in the street about issues? Sometimes. And by the way, look at all the Europeans that are in their state capitals, and look at Paris, look at Germany, look at all those people in the street protesting this war. That's fascinating that they got involved. And it's fascinating how much they support things like cutting off Russia's access to banks and that type of thing. It's amazing the kind of support. I don't think Putin understood that. I don't think he understood how people really are not enamored of this authoritarian belief in government, that Ukraine is pretty happy being a democracy, and they're pretty happy with who's running it, and they like voting. They've only been on their own now since 1991, yeah, and they have really embraced democracy and democratic institutions very quickly, which is the best weapon against authoritarian governments like Mr. Putin's. They don't want to go back to that. They don't want to respond to that. Somebody said, I don't think they're more involved, as it's more of a form of virtue signaling, to feel or stand superior to their peers. Do-gooders can brag about doing good. That's pretty normal. I will say that some volunteerism goes on college applications, when in fact they should have studied more rather than gotten out and done something. Do things out of the goodness of your heart without an expectation of a reward. And somebody said, I was really surprised when I saw that Switzerland, normally Switzerland is your banker, and he doesn't take a political stand. He just wants your money in his bank. That's all he cares about. Well, they came out against Putin. And I don't know if y'all realize this or not, but Putin is the wealthiest person in the world. He has personalized Russia's wealth. And that's a nice way of saying he stole it. He's friends with a lot of oligarchs who keep him in power. And those oligarchs have deals with him where they'll say, if you look the other way, I'll give you 50% of what I've got. There's a lot of mafia values. And the Russian mob, they're pretty tough. They're pretty mean. And Putin definitely has their support. I see more young people with a passion for politics since the Trump-Clinton election. Many new people passionate about politics. Trump, one positive that came out of that was it got people to be involved in the next election. And that was really, really important. I think some people who voted for Trump had their feelings hurt more, because he didn't turn out to be what they were expecting, either. So, you have to welcome the Trump supporter who's turned away from Trump, because they're terribly disappointed. And I have to agree, that is not your normal Republican Party at all. Uh, it's wildly different than Republican values. Widely different. By the way, we have to talk about what's a Democrat and what's a Republican. And I was thinking the other day, oh my goodness, do I explain the old Republican Party or do I explain the new Republican Party? How about I do both and show you how much they've changed? And hopefully I can have some graphics and I'll send those things out to you and you'll get them ahead of time. So we'll talk about political parties. We'll talk about elections. We'll talk about how Democrat and Republican mean different things than they used to. Okay. Democrats were the party of segregation. Democrats were not welcoming to African Americans. And it the the value systems of the parties changed over time. So you have to be aware of that. I don't want y'all to worry about a lot of trivial information. This isn't Jeopardy. You're not going to have to name the last president who owned slaves. You don't have to do that kind of thing. But media, I think that's a very important area for us to talk about, because how do you learn about politics? Through the media. And it's important for us to consider bias and that kind of thing. And we'll do that. We'll do that. Let's see. Political parties, elections, interest groups, about lobbying. And I want you all to grow up to be lobbyists. If I had it to do over again, not only would I be a city manager somewhere, I would do lobbying because that's where the money's at. And if you love government and you like to persuade people to vote for things that you support, lobbyists are where we go with that. So we have our work cut out for us, and there's so many things happening in the news. So don't be afraid to bring that up and ask questions about whatever weirdness you saw on the news, because that's good fuel for our class. It's nice to see y'all, and I enjoy y'all's class. Should I tell y'all that our time together is my favorite time, so that the other classes are all jealous? Yes, let's start that kind of business. Anyway, the point of the matter is I really do enjoy seeing y'all, and I really do hope that you're getting something out of this and that you're not afraid, because I'm not going to bite your head off. Oh, let me say this. The essays, the discussion question, wow, you guys did great. I'm still reading them. I'm still putting them together, but I really liked it. I thought I didn't like the question. Y'all can tell me, me, I'm going to want to change the question my way, I didn't like the questions. I didn't like the wording, and I thought it left y'all hanging a lot. But one thing that was great is y'all took information and synthesized it and explained it very clearly and with very good vocabularies, and y'all write well. I was really impressed, and you've done something for me, and I like to admit it when I've grown about something. I'm kind of thinking about research papers in a different way now. Rather than have a big honking research paper and worry about citations and all of that stuff, would you rather discuss it as a group and be like live like we are now? And I know that forces some of y'all to talk that don't want to talk, and I worry about that because I don't want, if you're shy, I don't want to push you. But I believe all of you have something to say, and I know that, anyway. But I was impressed with how willing y'all were to talk about things and to express yourselves, and you have a great deal to say. Maybe research papers should be done more in a discussion kind of way. The citation stuff, I could provide all the information. That way we don't get hung up on citation. Okay. Let's talk about it more. I'll let y'all go. And somebody said you have nightmares. It's going to be okay. I did wake up after surgery the other day, and it was one of those things where you went to sleep and you woke up and you didn't know that they had actually done it and they were finished with it. It was like, wow. I mean, they took really good care of me. I didn't know, but I'd had nightmares when I was asleep in surgery, and I tell you, the world is a scary place, and I really worry about y'all digesting that and having anxiety about it. So that's something we could talk about too. Somebody said, why did Russia start this war? And why not a few years after, or earlier or later? That's a good question, and one that we will develop more. But I will say this: Mr. Putin has done absolutely nothing to build a legacy. Presidents like buildings with their names on them. Okay, think about it that way. He has not done something. There's no great society out of him. There's no reason for him to be a household word in Russia. And I think that he feels the pressure of being 70 years old, and he doesn't really have anything to show for it. You know, there aren't bridges, the Putin bridge. I mean, you know, there aren't those kinds of things. And I think that the thing that bothered him greatly was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think he wanted to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. He sure did leave with an awful lot of people. And I think that there was this desire to push out of Ukraine and go for further real estate. And that could be really bad because some of those old republics are members of NATO. And y'all know how NATO works, right? It's a collective security agreement. What that means is an attack on that country is an attack on all NATO countries. And so all NATO countries come to the aid of their little battered country. And he would have global nuclear war on his hands. So why now? I think it's age. And let me just point this out to you. I'm no fan of Donald Trump, and I will criticize him forever for some of the really bad decision making. But he really talked bad about NATO, and he used divisions in NATO to his advantage. He talked about breaking up NATO. He wanted American soldiers in Germany, the most sacred of American soldiers in Germany. He wanted them to come home. You know, the base that Elvis was at. He wanted those people to come home. No, folks. You know what their job is in Germany? Is to keep those Russians in Russia and not let them out into the rest of the world because they can't handle it. They go wild. Okay. You know, it's conquer, conquer, conquer. That's what Russia does. Conquer, conquer, conquer. Okay. 11 time zones. They manage 11 time zones, y'all. Most of that is uninhabited area, but nonetheless, the point is, why now? I'm kind of surprised this didn't happen during Trump's last year in office. Or did Trump help set the stage for what Putin thought this would all be? I think he was very surprised, and I don't want to keep you forever, but let me say this. I think he was very surprised at how solid the NATO response was. And why was it solid? I'll give you this answer. Joe Biden, he's Catholic. He's only the second Catholic president we've had. Notice it's not a big deal. Like, you might have known that he was Catholic, but so when John Kennedy was elected, oh, scandal, he's a Catholic. That means he loves the Pope more than the Constitution, right? Wrong. But what Joe Biden did when he met the Pope, all the TV cameras were on Biden and the Pope. What did Biden do the whole time he was there in Vatican City? He called NATO leaders and they all came to Vatican City too. And you know what? They sat around and they talked about all the intelligence they were getting that Putin was planning something. They laid the groundwork for NATO cooperation while we were all watching the Pope and Biden shake hands. They were doing hard work at keeping the NATO alliance together so that when Putin did something, there was a mighty fast response. No, we don't like this, and we're going to check you. And we sent 40,000 troops. And I tell you what, if he goes into a NATO country, heaven help us, there will be an immediate and swift response. I'm not suggesting to you that it would be nuclear, but these guys will definitely have enough gasoline to push him back. they won't be broken down on the side of the road. Our best folks will be there. So I think that's what it's all about. I think sometimes these things are very ego driven. Okay, very ego driven. Let's quit. Y'all have a good night. Enjoy this political season. Why? Because we don't have a lot of myth and ritual. And while an authoritarian government is trying to take over a sovereign nation, you get to vote. You get to see the state of the nation. That's really encouraging. That's really a heartfelt, patriotic thing. Kind of makes me weepy. Okay. See y'all later. Thank y'all ever so much for your attention. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Glad you're doing better.